to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today's text is 2 Chronicles chapter 23. But in the 7th year Jehoiada took courage, and entered into a covenant with the commanders of hundreds, Azariah the son of Jeroham, Ishmael the son of Jehohanan, Azariah the son of Obed, Messiah the son of Adaiah, and Elishaphat the son of Zichri. And they went about through Judah, and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah, and the heads of fathers' houses of Israel. And they came to Jerusalem. And all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God. And Jehoiada said to them, Behold, the king's son. Let him reign, as Yahweh spoke concerning the sons of David. This is the thing you shall do. Of you the priests and Levites who come off duty on the Sabbath, 1/3 shall be gatekeepers, 1/3 shall be at the king's house, and 1/3 at the gate of the foundation. And all the people shall be in the courts of the house of Yahweh. Let no one enter the house of Yahweh except the priests and ministering Levites. They may enter, for they are holy, but all the people shall keep the charge of Yahweh. The Levites shall surround the king, each with his weapons in his hand, and whoever enters the house shall be put to death. Be with the king when he comes in, and when he goes out. The Levites and all Judah did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they each brought his men who were to go off duty on the Sabbath, with those who were to come on duty on the Sabbath. For Jehoiada the priest did not dismiss the divisions. And Jehoiada the priest gave to the captains the spears and the large and small shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of God. And he set all the people as a guard for the king, every man with his weapon in his hand, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, around the altar and the house. Then they brought out the king's son, and put the crown on him, and gave him the testimony. And they proclaimed him king. And Jehoiada and his sons anointed him, and they said, Long live the king! When Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king, she went into the house of Yahweh to the people. And when she looked, there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance, and the captains and the trumpeters beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets, and the singers with their musical instruments leading in the celebration. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, Treason! Treason! Then Jehoiada the priest brought out the captains who were set over the army, saying to them, Bring her out between the ranks, and anyone who follows her is to be put to death with the sword. For the priest said, Do not put her to death in the house of Yahweh. So they laid hands on her, and she went into the entrance of the horse gate of the king's house, and they put her to death there. And Jehoiada made a covenant between himself and all the people, and the king, that they should be Yahweh's people. Then all the people went to the house of Baal and tore it down. His altars and his images they broke in pieces, and they killed Mattan the priest of Baal before the altars. And Jehoiada posted watchmen for the house of Yahweh under the direction of the Levitical priests, and the Levites whom David had organized to be in charge of the house of Yahweh, to offer burnt offerings to Yahweh, as it is written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and with singing, according to the order of David. He stationed the gatekeepers at the gates of the house of Yahweh, so that no one should enter who was in any way unclean. And he took the captains, the nobles, the governors of the people, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of Yahweh, marching through the upper gate to the king's house. And they set the king on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet, after Athaliah had been put to death with the sword. This is the word of the Lord. In the 7th year, this would be the 7th year of Athaliah reigning over Jerusalem, they hid the proper king, the prince. They hid Joash for 6 years in the temple at the end of chapter 22. So in the 7th year of that hiding, Jehoiada takes courage. He's going to undo this wrong. He's going to take Athaliah off the throne and put Joash on it. Now, we should remember Jehoiada, the priest, would be doing this for Yahweh, and doing this, as he's going to say, for the promise of the king, of David's sons being king that God has made. We'll come back to that. But he's also the brother-in-law. He married a daughter of King Ahaziah, Jehoshabeth, and it's Jehoshabeth who rescued her little brother. So together, Jehoiada and Jehoshabeth, in theory, have been raising and caring for, along with the nurse, this little boy for the last 6 years. Now Jehoiada, as Joash is now 7 years old, Jehoiada prepares to put him on the throne over all of Judah. So, 7-year-old king, but that's chapter 24 that talks about that. So Jehoiada makes a covenant with various leaders of the people, and then together these men go out and they round up the people. They gather them together. The people, the Levites, the elders, they bring them all to Jerusalem, and together in the temple, at the temple, they make this covenant with the young king, Joash. And this is what Jehoiada says: "Behold the king's son. Let him reign as Yahweh spoke concerning the sons of David." So this is the king's son, Joash, the youngest, the only one that survived Athaliah's attempted coup, which really, worked out quite well for her, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. She got to reign for 6 years. But Jehoiada recalls, as Yahweh spoke concerning the sons of David, he recalls the promise that God has made to David that one of his sons will sit on his throne in Jerusalem forever. This is his reasoning for making Joash king. Again, he's only a 7-year-old boy. But God is faithful. Whereas the 22-year-old king, Ahaziah, only reigned for a year, Joash, at 7, is going to reign for much longer. Much, much longer. So he instructs the Levites and the priests who are coming off duty. They had basically 2-week rotations of work that David had established. So when one group was coming off duty, instead of actually coming off duty, they were going to be broken into thirds. 1/3 guarding the gate, 1/3 guarding the king's house, and another third guarding a specific gate, the gate of the foundation. It's hard to really know all the different gates around the temple and around the city of Jerusalem and what their names are. Oftentimes there's there's really not a map in Scripture of where all these gates are laid out. So it's guesswork, really, to guess which gate is which. But all the people are then gathered into the courts of the temple. Jehoiada mentions that no one should enter the house of Yahweh, enter the actual temple itself, except for the priests and those Levites that minister to him. So he's remembering here the law of God. Not just anyone could enter the temple. And so he's not suggesting that they break that on behalf of the king. They're going to do this by the book, if you want to phrase it that way, the book, the Old Testament, the Bible. So the people who are tasked with caring for the Lord's house, they can enter it. Those who can't, well, they'll remain outside. Keep the charge of Yahweh. So what are these Levites going to do who are then just came off duty? They're going to surround the king, each with weapon in hand. Whoever enters the house shall be put to death. These are going to guard the king as he comes and goes. Now, Levites have a history of violence. Simeon and Levi in Genesis chapter 34 are the brothers who convinced the people of Shechem, the city of Shechem. Shechem, the son, the man, had raped their brother Dinah. Simeon and Levi convinced them all to get circumcised so that their people can be united, they can be one. But it was a deception, it was a ruse to get them to be basically incapacitated, following that delicate and painful surgery, so that Simeon and Levi then could take their swords and go through the city of Shechem and kill all the men. That cost them the blessing of the firstborn. Genesis chapter 49. But the Levites also end up being the ones who in Exodus chapter 32, when the Israelites have made the golden calf and worshipped it, Moses summons all to himself who are for Yahweh and commands them to strike down these who worshipped the golden calf. and it's the Levites who fight against their own brethren that day. And it is that account from Exodus 32 that results in the Levites being given the priesthood, being that priestly line. So at this point, they do everything Jehoiada has been commanding. The ones who were going to go off duty, they don't. They stay on in a different capacity for the next couple of weeks, and Jehoiada arms them with spears and with shields so that they are prepared to defend the king. And they do, every man with his weapon in hand. South side of the house to the north, around the altar and the house. So they surround everything. The altar would be outside the house, unless it's the altar of incense that is not specified. So this could be the altar of incense inside the house. That would make sense, I think, in the context here. So they have surrounded the interior of the house, both its south and its north walls, the altar itself. And at this point, they bring out Joash, the son of the king. They put the crown on his head and they give him the testimony. The word could also be covenant, some sort of a special document pertaining to being king. Not quite a contract, but also probably not a reference to the tablets of the testimony or the tablets of the covenant, which are the 10 Commandments that were stored inside the Ark of the Covenant. Anyway, whatever it is that they hand to him, they proclaim him king. And Jehoiada the priest and his sons, also priests, anoint Joash. Now, to be anointed is to be set apart for a specific role of service. It is to have oil poured over your head. So maybe a question to your children: who was anointed to be our king? The answer to that is Jesus. So Old Testament, they tended to anoint prophets, priests, and kings. Jesus fulfills all three of those functions, all three of those roles for us. He is our prophet. He speaks God's word to us. He is our priest who deals with the sacrifice, that is his own flesh, on our behalf to bring us forgiveness. And then he is also our king as he rules over, cares for us. But it's worth noting that that word anointed is what gives us the Old and New Testament titles for him. We think of Jesus as the Messiah and the Christ. Messiah is the Hebrew word for anointed one. Christ is the Greek word for anointed one. Mashiach, Christos, to be a little bit more specific. And so Jesus is the one anointed to be our king. They say to him, "Long live the king." It's a blessing, in a way. A prayer to the Lord, perhaps, that he would bless this young man with a long reign as king. When Athaliah heard the noise of the people, she went into the temple. First time, 6 years, right? 7 years, 7th year. She has not been in the temple to notice that Joash was still alive until now. And she cries out, "Treason, treason," which in her mind it is treason because she is queen and they're seeking to replace her. However, he is the rightful heir to the throne. She is the usurper. She was the one that brought about the coup, not him. This is his throne from the Lord keeping his promise. So Jehoiada has the captains remove her from the temple, and anyone who seeks to follow her can also be put to death with her, but don't put her to death in the temple. The Lord's house is holy. Death is unclean, so don't mix the two. So that's exactly what occurs. They take her outside and they execute her. Really, it's the entrance of the horse gate of the king's house. So they execute her by the king's palace. Then Jehoiada makes a covenant between himself, all the people, and the king that they would be Yahweh's people. So here is another covenant made by the people before the Lord. Not the first in the book of Chronicles. They tear down the house of Baal and all of his images, his altars. They kill his priest. So this is getting rid of a lot of the false worship in the land of Judah. This is appropriate. Jehoiada posts watchmen for the temple. under the direction of the priests and the Levites, whom David had organized. And then we're going to see a lot of that David's organization stuff here, actually, of the Levites into tribes and gatekeepers and singers and so forth. And the point of that is to connect back to 1 Chronicles. It was a major focus in 1 Chronicles that David was organizing these Levites into all these different groups for service in the Lord's house, in the temple. So Jehoiada is acting upon that, instructing these Levites to do what has been given to them to do. That includes the offerings. Those were talked about in the law of Moses, a reference to the book of Leviticus. But they also sing, they rejoice, they guard the gates. We learn one of the rare spots where actually a description of what the gatekeepers do, and they keep out those who are unclean in any way. So you had to pass by the gatekeepers, and they acted almost like bouncers to the temple. He takes the captains, the nobles, the governors, all the people. They bring down the king. They bring him to his throne. So the king makes it to his palace. This little boy, 7 years old, makes it to his palace, makes it to his throne, and the people of the land rejoiced. They rejoiced at the gift of a king who would reign over them again.